absolutely massive moment in US political history. This is being called one of the closest presidential elections ever. Millions of people have already cast their vote, and millions more are going to be going to the ballot boxes across the 50 states of America to decide, do they want Donald Trump, the former president, the Republican, taking back the keys to the White House, or do they want Kamala Harris, the vice president, who would become the first female leader of the United States, winning it for the Democrats? Lots of issues to unpick here. Joining me now live on LBC News, Laura Smith, presidential historian at the University of Oxford, assistant teaching professor at Arizona State University, and you're joining us live from Phoenix, Arizona. Thanks so much for your time this evening, Laura. So we've been calling this one of the closest elections in history. How accurate is that?
Well, I mean, just as you were describing it, my stomach was tightening. I mean, we're here. It's definitely still the afternoon. We're not quite at election night yet here in the U.S. 2 hours ahead of us is Eastern Standard. Obviously, polls close at 7, so we do have a ways to go. 5 more hours of voting on the East Coast. So in terms of historically, I mean, for example, Dixville Notch is a teeny tiny little town in New Hampshire that the media was absolutely centered upon last night because they allow for their election the voting to happen at midnight on election night, and there are only 6 people who live in this tiny village, and yet it was divided 3-3, and it's seen as reflective of just how close this is historically. So the major concern, not only about safety, but also in terms of how long it will take to get the results. Of course, it could end up in the House of Representatives, which has happened before.
And so can you just explain that process to us a little bit, Laura? So if it ends up in the House of Representatives, how will that vote go?
That's the $1 million question. So ending up in the House of Representatives is when no candidate gets the necessary, in this case, 270, majority of the Electoral College votes. They don't win enough of the states to get them over that threshold to be able to actually win the presidency. So it's thrown into the House of Representatives because, of course, the popular vote is not irrelevant, but certainly you can't win the presidency alone on the popular vote. You need the Electoral College. So it's thrown into the House of Representatives, and then the Speaker of the House has to go about the very messy process historically and in terms of actually the deciding factor in terms of who becomes president. So certainly there isn't a lot of speculation that will happen, but there is a lot of speculation that it will be very tight.
Now, it's thought that this could all come down to one of the swing states, 7 of them across America. You're in Arizona right now, which is one of them, the key battleground where this election is going to be won or lost. How is it looking where you are?
Tense. Tense is the word of the day, the watchword of the day. I mean, it's been really interesting, frankly, observing this, because originally, obviously, you had both candidates, Trump and Harris, coming to Arizona quite frequently, 7-8 times. I think they've campaigned here equally. But then the focus shifted into Pennsylvania and what used to be considered the blue wall, Harris trying to keep that up in places like Michigan and all those areas. However, there was this sort of Hail Mary in the last 2 weeks. Volunteers on the Democrat side have arrived nationwide. There are people from New York, there are people from California, all over the place to volunteer specifically in Arizona because they're worried about it. We haven't seen the same ground game on the Republican side, but obviously there's a lot on the ballot. Abortion is on the ballot in Arizona right now. So we don't know whether that's going to equate, because there is a massive gender gap too in terms of female voters coming out and supporting women's right to choose as well as Harris, or whether there'll be a divided ballot on that.
Of course, abortion rights, as you mentioned, they're being one of the really key issues as part of this election. We've been hearing a lot about how tightly fought this particular election is and how neck and neck it's been. Over the weekend, there was that one poll showing that there was a gain for Harris in Iowa, one of the other swing states, which had traditionally been Republican. And it's thought it was because young women are coming out to vote for Kamala Harris. Do you think that this could be the issue that wins or loses the election?
It could be. I mean, in some states, you could go as far as to say it is kind of what we would look at as a referendum in Britain, right? This is a referendum issue in some states in terms of it could hinge on that. It's impossible to say. There is promising trajectory for the Democrats in the sense that 2018, obviously Republicans, Donald Trump in the White House thought he could really focus in on immigration, get a big turnout in the midterms. Didn't happen. Instead, a lot of women were voting on kitchen table issues, healthcare being one of them. And then after Dobbs' decision and getting rid of Roe v. Wade and the protection of abortion rights, you then had a lot of women who are doing the sort of what is known as the silent vote, because they're not publicly advertising that they're pro-choice. But Julia Roberts even voiced an ad for the Harris campaign recently, encouraging women to not advertise but feel comfortable voting their conscience. And it was a very controversial ad. A lot of Republicans really jumped on that one.
And of course, security is a really big issue with this particular election. I mean, we've just been hearing that news coming out of the Capitol in the past few minutes. A man's already been arrested outside the Capitol building with a torch and a flare gun, police saying that he smelled like fuel. There has been a massive increase in security, given concerns that we could see similar scenes to January the 6th.
That is the major concern. I think that what a lot of states are preparing for, especially in these quite literally battleground states, perhaps, that's the major fear, is focusing on security on a state level. So, for example, you see things in terms of the struggle to get volunteers for poll watching. That was a major concern, where to have the polls. Obviously, in 2020, there were people, even in the midst of COVID, who turned up and were violent and threatening. So this sense of the security issue is a major concern. And obviously, we've seen this trajectory go from concerns over overseas terrorism, obviously in American history, to switching to really focusing concerns on domestic terrorism and potentially sort of neo-Nazi type threats. So this concern is real in terms of making sure that everyone is safe. We've seen ballot boxes lit on fire. You may have followed that in the Pacific Northwest states like Washington, Oregon. And there was a question as to, well, hundreds of ballots were destroyed. How are those people going to be told that they now need to vote a different way? So these sorts of security concerns are very active and nationwide, unfortunately.
Laura Smith, you're a presidential historian at the University of Oxford, speaking to us from Phoenix, Arizona. Really appreciate your insight tonight. This all-important night here on LBC News as America decides. Thank you very much. Now, of course, thank you. And of course, lots of focus being put